you're running a marathon. And then all of a sudden, you got this little pain, cramp that's happening here. What was just developed here? What's that pain from? You ever hear lactic acid? All right. We'll talk about lactic acid when we get into the muscle system. But it develops lactic acid, meaning that your body is going to be more acidic at this time when you're running a marathon, which means you're going to produce a lot more hydrogen ions in your body. Look what's going to happen here. You're going to increase this. More hydrogens, you're going to increase this. Does that make sense? If this gets increased, does the reaction want to go to the cabinets or to the screen? You're putting more ingredients here, and it's got to be 50-50. In other words, if you put more ingredients here, it's now going to be, let's say, 70% here, and it's going to be 30% here, because you're putting more ingredients here. So if that happens, does the reaction want to go to the clock or to the screen? To the clock. The reaction is going to go this way, and what happens to the amount of carbon dioxide? Does it increase or decrease? It goes up. Now, when you're running a marathon, aren't you blowing off a lot more CO2? And that's what's happening. So you're actually blowing off more CO2 until this whole thing becomes 50-50, which really is always going to be going that way until you stop running and your body adjusts. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, let's do until it gets 50-50. All right, now, let's talk about someone who has emphysema. Okay? This is a person, I don't want to get too heavy with this. MP2, we'll talk about it more. But this is a person who has problems, can't let out all the oxygen. All right? They're smokers, and with smokers, their lungs become very inflated. It's like normally, here, I'll just give you this. Your lungs normally is like a balloon. You blow up the balloon, it gets big, you let out the air, it goes all the way out, and all the air comes out. That's the way our normal lungs would work. In a person who has emphysema, their balloon has been blown up 4 billion times basically, and is over and it's overinflated, it's baggy, it's flabby. So it's easy to get the air in, and it's much bigger. That's why their chests are much bigger. But when they want to get the air out, you let go of the nozzle and it goes tss. But then there's air trapped in there because you can't get the rest of it out. So they use their accessory muscles, and the only way to get out the rest of the air, you got to squeeze out all this. And you usually see these people in Walmart, right? You see them like carrying the oxygen. I'm not making fun, but I mean, they have the oxygen tank here. They're leaning over, right? You've seen this, right? Because we're seeing a lot more people with with COPD and emphysema nowadays, all right? Because they were heavy smokers back then, and they just destroyed the lungs. Now they're paying for it because now they're on all this oxygen, and they're leaning forward, trying to squeeze out that extra air it's just trapped there. So they have issues. Like if for us to walk from, the door to here, that's no issue. But for them to walk from the door to here, it's like them walking a 10-mile marathon because they have all this carbon dioxide that's just built up. So look at what's going to happen here. When they walk from there to here, lactic acid's building up. This is going up. Does that make sense? Just the way we would be running a marathon. So this goes up. Does the reaction go to the clock or to the screen? Excuse me? If this goes up, it goes to the clock. Are they going to make more CO2? They have to make more CO2. Can they blow off the CO2? No. Well, look what's going to happen here. This can't happen. Or it does, but not very efficiently. So now, does CO2 increase in the body? Yes. Yeah. As this goes up, does the reaction go to the screen or to the clock? Now, it's going to go back this way. And what happens to the amount of hydrogen?
It decreases.
No,
Okay.
it goes up. If you're putting, look, if this is going to be, because you can't blow this off, this will go up to like 70%. Over here, it's 30%. So now you're going to have to push it this way. This is going to increase. You don't want all this acid in your body. It causes problems. It starts destroying enzymes and stuff. They have a condition called respiratory acidosis. It's a condition where there's a lot of hydrogens and it's not good. Can you get rid of this? You can. The kidneys get rid of this water-soluble stuff, but it takes hours for that to happen. And the problem is, just walking around, they keep on building this. This keeps getting piled up. And it's a cycle that goes on and on. The only way to fix it is just to remove the lungs and put new lungs there, but it's not going to happen. Why? Because they usually still enjoy their smoking. And we're not going to give a new set of lungs to someone who's continuing to smoke. They're heavy smokers. They have been in their life. Even though if they cut down, they still are, usually they're still smoking. Okay? So do understand this concept. Hint, 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 hint. There's a couple questions on your review questions to get this, but you need to get this down. You definitely need to worry about this in A&P2. So at least you got it down here. All right? And in A&P2, we'll go through a little bit more examples. We're vomiting and you start upchucking hydrochloric acid, and how does that affect this whole thing? We have a whole chapter on acid-base balance, but you got to make sure you know it here. Questions about that? Yeah? Okay? All right, so that's what that is. Now, a base, when dissolved in water, it's similar to acid, but instead of hydrogen, it's hydroxide. So when this solution, when this substance goes in water, it's going to dissolve and it's going to release hydroxide ions. If it releases a lot, then we consider it a strong base. And a good example of this is sodium hydroxide. Okay? And it's complete dissociation. If it's a weak base, it's going to do a partial dissociation. So something similar to this. A good example of a weak base, we don't have really that many weak bases to really concern about in our bodies. And that's why, when I had this, here's a strong base. I guess it doesn't really show like a weak base. But it's going to do the same kind of thing. But the acids, I think, if you understand that, you'll understand bases, and I won't ask you questions about like this kind of reaction. This reaction will be on the test. This is the one we talked about. Okay? So that's what that is. So if you put acid into here, it'll break up to this. If you put a base, potassium hydroxide, into here, it's going to release hydroxide ions. All right, and if you put anything that doesn't have a hydrogen, or it's not going to release hydrogens or hydroxides, then that's just going to be a salt. Not a salt, but you know. Okay? Now, how do you base this on everything? It's based on a scale called a pH scale. Okay? A pH scale will symbolize the amount of hydrogen in the solution. So it's based on hydrogen ions. Okay? The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. Anything from 0 to 6.99 is an acid, where 0 is a very strong acid, and a 6 is a very weak acid. A 7 is neutral. That means the hydrogen level and hydroxide level is equal. The only thing that is really a neutral 7 is distilled water. There's nothing really in there, it just equals. With the hydrogens and hydroxides. A base, we also say it's alkaline, is where it's going to go from 7.01 to 14, where 14 is an extremely strong base. Clorox is a strong base. You touch that, it will burn yourself. And then a weak base would be like a 8. Okay? So I'm not going to ask you to memorize all this, but I mean, just so you can recognize what's going on here. If you have an acid, a very strong acid, you're going to have a lot more hydrogens than hydroxide ions. If you have a very strong base, you're going to have more hydroxide ions than hydrogen. But if you have it neutral, they're going to be equal amounts in here. And it just shows you on here where vinegar falls in, where ammonia falls in, soap, where human blood falls in, just so you have an idea of where this all is. I'm not going to ask you about these kinds of things up here. This I would ask you about what makes a strong acid versus a weak acid and stuff. And this is just another one where bananas and stuff, where bleach, oven cleaner is pretty high up here. Okay? It's the only joke I could find here. You're a 10 on the pH scale, maybe, because you're basic. All right? So buffers, and everything I just talked about on here is really where this comes in, okay? So it resists the change. So normally, let me just erase this. So not for someone who's got emphysema, just talk about just normal. A buffer is this. It's not going to change the pH. If there is a change in pH, if you're going to put more hydrogens here, the reaction goes this way. If there's less hydrogens here, the reaction goes this way. So it balances it. It's a buffer to make sure, you know, if we're going to add a hydrogen here, we're going to remove it. If we're going to remove hydrogen, we're going to add it. It's making it so that the pH in your body stays the same, okay? And that's what that comes in. So in blood, we have a pH of 7.4. If it goes down to 7.1, you will be sick because all the enzymes and everything in your body have to work in this situation. If not, if your body gets more acidic, then that acid is going to destroy enzymes and you're not going to be able to work efficiently. Okay? So acidosis is where it goes, the pH goes low, and alkalosis, like alkaline basic, it becomes more basic. Okay? So your body mostly goes through more acidic stress than basic stress. I mean, your body's making amino acids, fatty acids, lactic acid. So our bodies go through more of a acid kind of change. Basic change, it depends on if you're sick. It depends on the foods that you eat. I think more vegetables will create more of a basic thing. But it doesn't matter because your body will, using this reaction, your body will adjust. There's a buffer that goes on there. Okay? This is carbon dioxide. It's gas. What organ gets rid of this? Lungs. These are water-soluble things. Ions. What organ gets rid of this? Kidneys. So what's going to happen is the lungs and the kidneys are going to work together. And when I teach AMP2, I flip-flop my order of doing stuff, and I put it so that the kidneys, or the urinary system and the pulmonary system, that's all on one test. Because there's a big correlation between the two. All right? If you have lung disease, the kidneys are going to compensate. If you have kidney disease, the lungs are going to compensate. If you got kidney and lung disease, you're screwed. All right? That's where we're going to have to fix something. So these people will be put on dialysis, basically a kidney that's outside the body, because you can't survive, your body can't adjust to this. Okay? So lung regulation, everything I just explained is all in here. These are for basically the students that aren't here. They have everything on here. Let me just talk about this real quick. So you've got to balance. If you increase the CO2, the pH goes down. Huh? Look. Look at the reaction here. If the CO2 increases, which way is the reaction going to go? To the screen or to the clock? If this increases in your body, the reaction is going to go this way. What happens to the amount of pH? Or I'm sorry, H? It goes up. If hydrogens go up, what happens to your pH? Does it go up or down?
More acidic, so it goes
down. Down. So if you increase the CO2, the pH goes down. See? It increases PCO2. P is partial pressure. Don't worry so much about the P. But the amount of CO2, if that goes up, the pH goes down. If the CO2 goes down, the pH goes up. And it's all about this reaction. This reaction is probably the most important reaction in your entire body. We'll talk about this again when we get into the brain, because at the blood-brain barrier, this happens also. It happens in the red blood cells, it happens in the pancreas, and in the kidneys, happens in the where else? The stomach. It happens a lot of places. So make sure if you're looking for a tattoo to get, this is the one to get. One of these days, I keep on saying, one of these days someone's gonna is change. This is a totally different thing. Okay? Isomers are basically, we have the same formula, it's just a different structure. For instance, Legos. All of us are familiar with Legos and putting things together. I'm going to take 100 Legos and build a Jeep. I'm going to break it up and use the same Legos and make a tree. I'm going to break it up and the same Legos, I'm going to make a flying saucer. So it's the same formula, the same 100 Legos, but the structure is different. Does that make sense? That's what an isomer is. It has nothing to do with isotopes, it just because of the iso, okay? So glucose and fructose are made up as 6 parts carbon, 12 parts hydrogen, 6 parts oxygen. But they look different from each other, but they're still made from the same stuff. All right? That's what an isomer is. Okay? Now,
Can I see that?
yeah, that one? All right? Okay?
Okay.
All right. So we have 4 categories of carbon compounds. All contain carbon. Okay? There should be 4 categories of organic compounds, but that's okay. All right. Proteins, carbohydrates, also known as sugar, fats, also known as lipids, and a miscellaneous group, nucleotides, ATP, nucleic acids. We kind of talked a little bit about this yesterday about RNA and DNA, so we'll talk briefly.
Is ATP the same thing, the energy? No.
Yep, that's the energy.
Oh, okay.
Yep, that's adenosine triphosphate. That's what we are, the energy. All right? Don't worry so much about what each one produces with calories per gram. I kind of put that as an FYI. You'll learn more about that when you get into the digestive system in AP2. So this is what it comes down to, okay? So, all right, we talked a little bit about making a protein. Remember how we were like making a brownie in class? That's making a protein. And we have amino acids, okay, that mom would bring an amino acid to make the protein and so forth. She brings her eggs. Dad brings the brownie mix. Sister brings in the water and so forth. They're